So now for our keynote speaker, who can do a much better job articulating the reasons why we need to care about not just ending homelessness, but how we do it and why animals are a part of that. For everyone who is here right now, I commend you for the good choice you made to be here for our keynote bright and early, because we have the privilege of hearing from an incredible speaker, social justice advocate, and dog lover, Oliva. Anne is the CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness, a public education, advocacy, and capacity building organization dedicated to ending homelessness in the United States. She's a career veteran of homelessness and housing policy, and she is recognized as one of the foremost experts on homelessness in the nation. In her role, Ms. Oliva works closely with members of Congress and the administration, as well as with officials and advocates at the state and local levels. As part of that role, she also collaborates closely with Alliance partners to educate the public on the real nature of homelessness and its solutions, and to advance known best practices within the homeless services sector. Ms. Oliva previously served as Vice President for Housing Policy for the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, and as a Senior Policy Advisor at the Corporation for Supportive Housing. Her distinguished career is also marked by a decade of federal service at the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development. My Dog is My Home recognizes that our mission to increase access to shelter and housing for people experiencing homelessness with animals sits squarely within the larger movement to prevent and end homelessness. And as homeless services reimagines itself to be a movement that aims for housing abundance, to create systems that promote dignity and choice, and reorients itself to understand and treat the trauma that people have experienced, the key issue of keeping people and their animals together becomes a more prominent topic in this discussion on ending and preventing homelessness. Oliva, you are such an expert and renowned leader in homelessness policy, and we also know that you totally get that animals are a part of people's chosen family. We are honored that you have joined us to ground our conference and this community's 3 days together. Thank you so much for being here.
That was just so lovely, Christine. Thank you so much for having me. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. Okay. I hope that is working for everybody, that you all can see my slides. And again, I just want to say good afternoon to everyone, or good morning, I guess, for many of you on the West Coast. Thank you so much for being here for these days together and for having me today to talk about two things that Christine mentioned are of utmost importance to me. That is my work to end homelessness and how that connects to the animals and pets that have enriched my own life and the lives of countless others, including from the show of hands that I just saw, most of the people in this virtual room with me today. And before I get started, I want to just give a special thanks to my friend and colleague, Ann English, who introduced me to this organization and who I have spent lots of time with talking about not just our dogs and cats, but about how to meaningfully engage people with lived expertise in our work and how to orient our systems, as Christine mentioned, towards treating people experiencing homelessness with the love and respect that they deserve. And again, as you heard, my name is Anne Oliva. I am the CEO of the National Alliance to End Homelessness. And while I am relatively new to this job, I'm about 9 months into this job, I am not new to this field. And as Christine mentioned, really my whole career has been dedicated to ending homelessness. And I've worked in service to that goal, both in the public and nonprofit sectors, from starting my career as a VISTA volunteer in the early 1990s to being the Deputy Assistant Secretary for the homeless programs at HUD, to about everything in between before taking the helm here at the Alliance. And for those of you who might not know us at the Alliance, we are a nonprofit, nonpartisan national organization whose sole mission is very simple. It's to prevent and end homelessness in the United States. And we do that work through three major types of activities. We work on national policy by educating members of Congress and the administration about homelessness and the evidence-based practices that work, as well as through grassroots advocacy. We also help communities build their capacity by working alongside them to implement systems and to provide training and technical assistance at the community level. And then third, we operate the Homelessness Research Institute, which provides us with the information, data, and evidence that we need to conduct our work at the national and local levels. And then cutting across these areas is really our communications work. Our communications work is really to develop and promote the narrative about homelessness and making sure that we're effectively communicating what works to the field and to our national partners. In 2020, before I got here to the Alliance, we partnered with PetSmart Charities to produce a guide to keeping people and pets together in the homelessness assistance system to improve outcomes for both humans and animals. And at the end of my presentation today, when I figure out, I have a lot of screens going here, so I don't think I can do it right this second, but I will put the link to that resource into the chat so folks can download it. It's a really fantastic resource that makes this connection that we're gonna be talking about over the next couple of days really real for folks. But today, I'm going to talk to you a bit about how we think about building community and the systems change we need, including what I have seen and heard so far since I came to the Alliance last June. I will preview what you might be able to expect from the National Alliance in the months and years to come. So, while I have this resource that's available to everybody, I'm actually going to be forecasting a little bit for 2023 and beyond as I talk with you today. And I'll start by saying it's an incredible honor to lead the Alliance and the team here at this moment in time, but it's also a challenge. And it's a challenge because of the political environment, because of the shortage of deeply affordable housing units, because staff across the country are exhausted, including probably many of you in our virtual space here today. And a lot of service providers are seeing, large staff vacancies that lead to burnout for the people who are still in place. And it's also a challenge because we've been in a pandemic for 3 years. So I really feel like we need to find a new path forward to work together. And I'm looking at this time period in the Alliance's history, as well as in the field's history, as an opportunity to really dig deep on what we know has worked, to push the field sort of programmatically and policy-wise, and to see how folks want and need us to show up and support them in ways that we might not have done in the past. It's one of the reasons that I'm here with you all today, is to hear about the ways that we need to show up and support you all in new and different ways. And as an organization, we're evolving and embracing new approaches that reflect the reality of where we are today as a nation and as a housing and homelessness field. And in this case, as an animal welfare field. So to get to all of that, the team at the Alliance has been implementing ways to hear directly from communities. That is, people who are currently or who have recently experienced homelessness, service providers and frontline workers, and community leaders about the challenges faced in our field and about innovations that are happening nationwide. Last fall, we kicked off a series of listening sessions. It will be between 8 and 10 sites in total to help inform our work and in 2023 and beyond. But before I get to that, this is the only time I really get to do this and show this slide, and I'm very excited about it. Before I get to all of that I'm going to talk to you about today, I want to take a minute to share a bit about why I'm here today and why the intersection between our collective work with animals is tied to the work that I do every day to end homelessness. So you can probably get the impression from this slide that I am a dog person. These are actually the last 4 dogs that I've had but I've had a total of 7 in my adult life. I adopt dogs who are usually adults or older in their lives. So while I get to spend great time with them at the tail end of their lives, it's never long enough. And unfortunately, I lost my last 2. That would be Haley and Buster up there on the screen during the pandemic. And I haven't quite gotten over it enough to get a new pet, but I'm getting there, and I hope to be ready to add to our household in the spring. And I say all of that because I understand the unconditional love and support, the joy that animals can provide, especially in times of stress. And homelessness is exactly that. It is incredibly stressful for the people who experience it. People cope with that level of toxic stress in a lot of different ways. And one of those ways is to have a pet with them. A few weeks ago, I was in LA at a place folks refer to as Cuban Corner in LA Skid Row. I'm Cuban. I went to go talk to some of the folks at Cuban Corner in Skid Row. And I met a man there living in a tent, as one does on Skid Row. And he spent the first 10 minutes after meeting me showing me photos of his dog on his phone. And what he said really struck me. He said that he really missed his dog because it was the only being that gave him love no matter what. No matter what was happening in his life, no matter what the circumstances were, that his dog gave him love no matter what. But because he was worried about him on the street, he decided to send his dog to live with his brother until he could find a permanent place to live. And he talked a lot about missing him every day and wanting to go visit his dog as soon as he could. He didn't ask me for housing. And I, show up on Skid Row. I look like a person that might be able to help you, right? I look like an outreach worker or somebody who works in the field. He didn't ask me for housing. He didn't ask me for services or food or shelter that day. He asked me if I wanted to see photos of his dog. And that felt really powerful. It felt powerful because it connected us in a way that dog people often connect. But it also illustrated how much people who are experiencing homelessness want and need to be connected to others, including their pets, to get them through what are likely the darkest times in their life. So when we talk about building community and rebuilding the systems that serve people experiencing homelessness, we necessarily need to talk about how animals fit into this picture. Because if we don't, we're missing a crucial component of this work. And before I get to what we're hearing, I want to start with some national data to make sure that we're grounding this discussion and that I'm highlighting a few things that I think are really important. The first is that despite making progress on reducing homelessness across all populations between 2010 and 2015, homelessness, especially unsheltered and chronic homelessness, has steadily increased, making this an even more urgent crisis. And in 2020, HUD's data showed 2 things for the first time that I think deserve attention in this conversation as we set the tone for our next couple of days together. So in 2020, for the first time since HUD began collecting point-in-time count data, there was an increase in the number of people in families with kids living unsheltered for the first time since they began collecting that data in 2005. And then also in 2020, we saw the number of individuals living on the streets exceed the number of individuals living in shelters. That's always been the case for people experiencing chronic homelessness, but to see it amongst all people, all individuals living unsheltered, I think we crossed a threshold where we have more people, individuals living unsheltered than living in shelters for the first time. And that trend had continued in 2022. We also know that people of color and historically marginalized people, including people with disabilities who often have animals with them, and LGBTQ people are disproportionately impacted by homelessness. We know that families experiencing homelessness are typically headed by women. Many are headed by young parents, and they include a very high percentage of young children. And we also know that more than half of sheltered people and 40% of unsheltered people work, but still can't afford housing. So we as a field need to think critically and strategically about what's worked in the past and what we should be doing differently in the future. And I think to Christine's point earlier in this conversation, we also need to think about how we do our work and how we partner with others in this important work together. Because unsheltered homelessness has increased every year since 2015, we're seeing a rise in the number of encampments across the nation, but especially in coastal cities. And these are photos of an encampment near my office in Washington, D.C. And I want to take a minute to draw a line between what happened in that neighborhood to what we are talking about today. That particular encampment, which is called, it was at McPherson Square, a large square in the District of Columbia, at its largest was 74 people and was forcibly closed by the government last month. Some of the tents that you see in these photos were also home to people's pets. On the night before the eviction, the scheduled eviction, I spent quite a bit of time in the square and I talked to a woman who had her cat with her in her tent. And she was really worried about what was going to happen during the closure the next day. She was much more worried about what was going to happen with her animal than she was about herself, to be honest. And because I was talking with her the night before, I was able to flag this issue for outreach workers so that they could be prepared to care for her pet in a way that she found acceptable and that built trust. And while the overall outcome of that forced eviction was certainly not what we wanted because it happened and not everybody was housed, being able to respond to people's needs, specifically about their animals, hopefully had a longer term impact on the relationship between that resident and outreach workers who can hopefully eventually connect her to housing. And in that same neighborhood where McPherson Square is, I have often over the last year or so talked with a young man experiencing homelessness along with his dog, Lucky. Lucky is a total sweetie pie pit bull who always has, a paw for me or a kiss for me when I see them. And Lucky's owner had a voucher, a housing choice voucher, but was really having a lot of trouble finding an apartment that would take them both. And he wasn't going anywhere without Lucky. After a couple of months of searching, I learned just yesterday that this young man and Lucky are now permanently housed and doing really well. But honestly, it took way too long. He spent the winter on the streets here in Washington because the system isn't built for people who have pets. And this is why listening to people who are experiencing or who have experienced homelessness is so, so important. And while we're only about halfway through our formal listening sessions, I'd like to highlight some of the themes that we've been hearing through those sessions, as well as through surveys and site visits that we're conducting. So this is a word cloud that we created with the notes from all of these sessions, and it gives you a sense of what folks raised with us. With the word people being the biggest and right there in the center. And I don't think that it's a mistake that that word people is there in the center and it is the very biggest word in this word cloud. Because we heard loud and clear from every group that we talked to, including continuum of care leadership, people with lived experience and expertise of homelessness, frontline staff, that the homelessness system must center people and be deeply trauma informed. And that means that we have to be pet inclusive. We heard about challenges and wins with finding and getting folks into safe and affordable housing. We heard about landlords, evictions, and behavioral health services, and how the system needs to adjust, needs to change to meet changing circumstances and needs. And we heard about different and new practices driven by people with lived experience of homelessness that can create that change. So people who've experienced or are experiencing homelessness have provided a lot of information to us about what's worked and what hasn't, both during the pandemic and beyond. And I've sort of categorized this into 4 main themes. The first is that we need more and adequate affordable housing options and supports, and that they have to be developed and targeted to those who are most impacted by structural inequities. You saw that chart that I put up earlier that showed historically marginalized populations, people who are Black, Indigenous, and people of color, how they are impacted by homelessness, and really developing and targeting resources to those who are most impacted by those structural inequities came across loud and clear from people with lived expertise. They want dignity-based services led by the communities who are most impacted by homelessness. And we should design and support those in hopefully a post-COVID environment. We heard a lot about congregate shelter and the feeling that current congregate emergency shelter options are inadequate and that they also cause harm, both in sort of regular, normal circumstances and in a public health crisis or pandemic. And we also heard about the trauma that's created by criminalization, that communities should end practices that criminalize people just because they're experiencing homelessness, and that police are not appropriate outreach workers. And so what you see within all of these themes is the concept of flexibility to address the different needs of people who are experiencing homelessness, including people who are experiencing homelessness with pets, and asking people what they want and need to exit homelessness and eventually heal and thrive. And here are some of the other things that we've heard. We heard that the last 3 years has been incredibly hard at all levels of our system, that burnout among staff, especially frontline staff, is really high, and it has left folks feeling like they can't get in front of the system changes that need to be implemented. We heard that for people living unsheltered, the feeling of being othered and treated as less than is also really high, especially for those who have been subject to forced encampment evictions. We heard again about staff shortages and pay not keeping up with the increased cost of living. And we know that these shortages negatively impact people experiencing homelessness because they are forced to connect with someone new over and over and over again. And it's incredibly disruptive on their path to get housing and services that they want and need. We heard that the lack of affordable housing is driving people into homelessness for the first time in numbers that we haven't seen before, and that recruiting landlords is getting harder. And you heard my story about the young man that I talked about in McPherson, in the McPherson neighborhood, and his dog Lucky. Recruiting landlords is difficult in the best of circumstances. Recruiting landlords to take pets is even harder. We heard that services are harder to access, even for people who have received rental assistance. We heard about the increase in laws and policies that criminalize people experiencing homelessness, despite the fact that those practices significantly harm people. And all of these things that I just talked about are really hard, and they are real problems that our system is facing, but we have to understand them so that we can eventually tackle them. And despite these challenges, what I want you all to feel today and for the next 3 days together is hope. Because through these listening sessions, we also heard amazing things. We heard about incredible creativity. We witnessed compassion and humanity across our field. We saw some great programs, folks who were using harm reduction models to save lives and help people heal from trauma. We saw programs that work with young people and do skilled outreach. We heard spontaneous spoken word poetry and saw art and gardens made by people who had experienced really significant trauma in their lives. And we heard music from and shared food with people who have incredible talent. We met people's pets and saw them doing well in permanent housing with their companions right by their side. People cried with us. They shared their stories and they left us inspired and they left us grateful. And your question to me at this point might be, well, what is the Alliance doing with all of this information? And while we plan to do more listening sessions in the spring, we know that we have to act on what we know now. Inspiration without action doesn't result in the change that we need at the systems level. And our job now is to use the tools that we have at our disposal here at the Alliance to push for change, to create opportunities for growth and connection, to share and shift power, and to educate and challenge policymakers at all levels to take action on what works. And here are some of the things we plan to work on in 2023. We're making changes to the format of our conferences that to allow us to be more inclusive in our content and that prioritize and honor the voices of those with lived experience of homelessness. For our next conference in July, maybe we'll have some specific discussions about pet inclusive policies and practices. I'd love to hear more from you all about that today. We are in the middle of hiring a director of lived experience innovation who will lead and guide our work in this area and make sure that we as an organization and a field are well positioned to partner fully and thoughtfully with people who have lived expertise. In addition to our regular set of priorities, we're also going to be rolling out policy, capacity building, and research activities on unsheltered homelessness, affordable housing, and workforce issues. We're partnering with the group over at The Case Made. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of them, but they are a fantastic leadership and communications group headed up by Dr. Tiffany Manuel, who is just fantastic in our field. And they are going to help us retake control of the narrative about homelessness. We'll be releasing a playbook on how to do that at both the local and national levels in the next few weeks. Alongside some of our key national partners, we're launching a grassroots effort to build a cadre of ambassadors for the narrative and advocacy work that we need to do to combat harmful criminalization practices. And we are using the information from our listening sessions to revise our asks of the government, both the administration and Congress, to include things like supporting HUD's request for a 2-year funding cycle and increasing funding for supportive services so that staff salaries can be increased in a manner that is appropriate to the cost of living. And so what we need from you, from the folks in this audience, is partnership to make sure that all the needs of folks who are experiencing homelessness, including the needs of their companion animals, can be met. We are asking that you continue to focus on racial justice and equity so that we can make the important progress that we need to make in those areas. We're asking that you support our grassroots efforts, and that's what's up on the screen right now, to combat policies and laws that criminalize people just for existing in public spaces by signing on to the values statement that's available on our website and joining our network. We're asking that you become an ambassador for our work to retake the narrative about homelessness by implementing the practices that we'll be including in our playbook. And we are asking you to make connections with each other and with us so that we can do this work together. So please go to our website, get connected with us on our legislative and advocacy priorities, and sign on to our statement of values. I think it's going to be really important for you all to do that and really be part of our network so we can do this work together. And I'm going to leave you with this. This connection between animals and humans experiencing homelessness is about love. It is about support, and it is about healing. To end homelessness, we have to ground ourselves in those feelings, because when we don't, people feel marginalized, less than, left out, not worthy. Over the course of my long career in the work of ending homelessness, animals have been a key part of the formula for success for many, many people that I have worked with. In my early years, I talked my boss into writing checks for veterinary care because my client wasn't going anywhere without her dog, and the apartment building needed vaccination records. During my time at HUD, I approved a hedgehog as a service animal for a resident of permanent supportive housing because it's what she needed to feel safe, even though I had to, frankly, Google hedgehog to understand. I didn't really know the difference between a porcupine and a hedgehog, and I had to understand how big they were in order to make that decision. But we approved hedgehog as a service animal for a resident. And as I mentioned earlier, just recently, I saw a young man and his dog Lucky struggle to find a unit that would take them, and then begin healing when they were finally able to move into a safe place of their own. So I hope that we can continue to do this work of building community and rebuilding systems to meet the needs of all people experiencing homelessness together. I want to thank you again for having me. It's been such a pleasure to be with you all today. I never get to show pictures of my pets in presentations, and I want to thank all of you for everything that you do, your hard work and your commitment to animal welfare and to ending homelessness in your communities and in your region. Christine, I think back to you, and I'll stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much, Anne. That was wonderful, and I appreciate you taking the time to be with us, and for you lending your voice and your leadership to this mission that we have to keep people and animals together in circumstances of homelessness. I don't know if you can see the Hoova chat here, because I know you are logged into Zoom and people are putting things into Hoova chat, not in the Zoom chat. So I just want to read out some of the love that you're getting in Hoova here. You know, we have people who have lived experience who have chimed in, who are saying that this is something that they experienced with their companion animal. And it was a really difficult time for them to find services, shelter, and housing. I do see also a lot of frustration on the part of both animal welfare organizations and shelter and housing providers in the difficulty that they have with keeping people and their animals together. And then I see a lot of support and just a lot of appreciation for you and the personal stories that you have shared. It is incredibly meaningful for us to hear about the experiences that you have directly had in the efforts to keep people and their animals together. And we loved seeing the slide with your own dogs on there. Thank you so much for sharing that and including that. And we also have some messages in here saying, you know, we're incredibly sorry for your loss, because we all know how painful it is to lose a member of your family.
Yeah.
So everyone, please feel free to put your questions for Anne in the chat, in the Hoova chat again, and we will get through as many of those as we can. But to begin with, and as people are getting their thoughts together after your wonderful talk, and I do have a question for you myself. As I'm not sure if you saw it, but we sent out a tweet during the NAEH conference in Oakland saying animal people for housing first.
That's awesome.
We're big believers in housing first at My Dog is My Home. And in fact, it was my experience working in a housing first program that led to My Dog is My Home. It was sort of ironic. You know, housing first is meant to remove barriers to housing and services for people experiencing homelessness. In this housing first program, they touted meeting people where they are, being person-centered, etc., but no dogs allowed. And if you have a dog, you should get out. So can you spell it out for us? We can do better than this, right? How are the principles of housing first and taking a second look at the standard no pets allowed rule related?
Yeah. Thank you for that question. I think that is really important. It's one of those places where we could really work together to make a big impact in our field. I think, operating, especially a site-based supportive housing program, folks who operate those programs, again, tend to be understaffed. There are often lots of challenges and barriers to operating that kind of housing. That said, I think it would be a fairly simple change in a budget or an operating status to really be able to accommodate folks with animals. And certainly housing first as an approach is about creating the lowest number of barriers for entry into housing. So that would include, by definition, any barriers that would stop somebody who has a companion animal with them from being able to access that housing. So the first thing that I would say is I would really encourage providers who are housing first oriented, but who have those kinds of challenges or barriers in their intake procedures to do a full overhaul of their intake procedures to make sure that they can accommodate people with their companion animals. And then also change their operating budget to the extent that they can to accommodate the increased potential need of, being able to provide space, outdoor space for folks with companion animals, especially dogs, being able to accommodate them within the structure in different ways, having an elevator that can accommodate multiple. I know in my own building, when I have my pets, the elevator dance is always a little bit tough. You have to have rules around that, but it is absolutely essential that supportive housing providers take a close look at their policies and practices, especially if they say that they're a housing first provider, to really be low barrier to accommodate people with their companion animals, and whatever we can do at the Alliance to make sure that folks know that that's really a critical component of housing first, we're happy to do in partnership with y'all.
Thank you so much, Anne. That's actually the perfect segue to the next question that came in from the audience about partnership. So if you are an animal welfare organization or an organization that works more in the One Health space, so you're not necessarily like a shelter or housing provider, what are the ways that organizations can engage with NAEH? How can we work together to meet goals?
Well, I certainly put my contact information up on the last slide. I'd be happy to share it as well and make sure that folks know who we are here at the Alliance. On our website, there's a number of ways that you can engage with us and sign up for various activities and news alerts, so that when we need help with a specific policy area, you can be sure that you're getting notification of that and participating with us in our field calls. We do field calls really pretty often. And we do Capitol Hill Day, which I know a number of folks probably in this virtual room have participated in, and bringing your perspective as animal welfare organizations who are also interested in ending homelessness to the discussion. So I think that there's a number of ways that folks can interact with the Alliance. We also hold conferences twice a year, usually one on the West Coast and one in Washington, D.C. in July, and would encourage you all to come and participate. I know a few of you already do. I see some familiar faces on the screen today. So I think that there's plenty of ways that folks can partner with us. I would encourage you to reach out to us and to me or to one of my staff to get connected and talk about how we can do work together. The last thing I'll say on that, it's not just about the Alliance, really. It's also about what your local continuum of care or homeless service system is doing. And on their website, HUD has a list of all the contacts for everyone around, at least in the US. I don't know about in other countries, but in the US, there are a list of contacts that you can reach out to in your local community that you might want to start building relationships with to have an impact at the local level.
Thank you, Anne. So I have some other questions here. Could you elaborate more on how or what is done to recruit landlords? What could animal well-being organizations do to assist with this in our communities?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. And I don't know that I have a really clean answer, but what I can say is, again, what we've heard in the field as the affordable housing crisis deepens and sort of spreads from the coastal cities, even into the interior of the country, into suburban areas and rural areas, engaging with landlords has become tougher. And identifying landlords to participate with us has become more of a challenge. But I think the more people that are involved on the front end, that is really getting to know landlords, talking to them about our programs, ensuring that they know that that participating in our programs, in the homeless services programs or in the Housing Choice Voucher Program or other programs that serve people experiencing homelessness can be a benefit both to them and to the community, as well as to the person and their pet. So really being able to talk up and recruit landlords at the community level is really important. And I think that to the extent that animal welfare organizations know what landlords take pets and can help continuums of care who are always looking for units and are especially looking for units that allow pets, to make that connection at the local level, because that happens at a very, like a case manager by case manager sort of level. And we need to be able to make those connections as quickly as we can so that somebody like the young man that I described and Lucky don't have to wait. I mean, they waited for 3 months or more, and they waited in a tent outside in the winter here because they could not find a unit that took that would allow pets. So being able to cut that time down really, really just hinges on being able to connect with your local animal welfare groups with their continuum of care so that they can do that work together.
Wonderful. Thank you. And more questions. Actually, the QA is like exploding and we won't have time for all of these, but thank you for giving us ways to stay engaged with NEH. So what ideas do you have for engaging people with lived experience in meaningful roles in our organizations?
Yeah. So, you know, I think there's a number of ways to do that. And we actually just had a conference.
Giving us ways to stay in NEH, so in our organizations to do that. And we actually just had a conference.
I'm not sure what that is, but I'll pause for a second, see if it goes away. Okay.
I'm not sure what that is, but I'll pause and see if it goes away.
If I could just remind everyone to put themselves on mute. I think maybe we're getting a little feedback from somebody who's listening and is not on mute or has their microphone active. And I'm hearing it again now. If everyone could put themselves on mute. Thank you.
Okay, I'll try that again. So I lost my train of thought there, but
I can repeat the question if that would help. So what ideas do you have for engaging people with lived experience in meaningful roles in our organizations?
So we do have quite a bit of content on this in at our conferences. We just had a conference in Oakland a few weeks ago and had quite a bit of great content on what meaningful collaboration and partnership looks like. And it could look like a lot of different things, but it starts with creating community. It starts with making sure that folks who are on staff and on the board represent people who have lived experience and expertise, and not tokenizing people in that way. So really, what I mean is full and true partnership and power sharing and power shifting to people who have lived experience. In our case here at the Alliance, we are, not only do we have folks on our board who are my bosses who have lived expertise, but we are also now hiring, as I mentioned earlier, a director of lived experience innovation that will actually lead our work in this particular area, and that will sit in our equity office. So our chief equity officer will be the, sort of the place where this person's position and what will eventually be a team sits, because it is actually an equity and justice issue to make sure that we have these meaningful partnerships together. It also means paying people for their expertise. I don't mean like with pizza or gift cards. I mean actually compensating people for their expertise in a way that makes sense for them. It also means hiring people in all areas, including in leadership and management positions that have lived experience and lived expertise. So it's not an overnight thing. You have to actually build towards it. But as we here at the Alliance build towards it, and as we watch other organizations building towards that true meaningful shift of power and that true meaningful collaboration, we actually see things change in really beautiful ways.
Wow. Well, thank you. I have one last question for you, if you're able to stay on for another 60 seconds here.
Sure.
How do you facilitate the listening sessions? Who's invited? How many people typically attend?
Yep.
Sorry, that's 3 in 1, 3 rolled into 1.
It's all fine. It's really one question. So I am attending every listening session. I think I missed one when I had to travel on a specific day, but usually at least three of our staff go. I facilitate. We have a standard set of questions, but we really encourage open conversation. So all of those conversations, even though we start with a standard set of questions, they become different. All of them are different based on the experiences of the folks that we are talking with. Like I said, I generally facilitate them. We have myself, another person who's listening from my team to make sure that we are hearing the same thing, and somebody who's taking notes, which is how we created that word cloud that I showed you earlier. And then in the community that we're in, we really allow them. We say, here are the 3 groups of folks we want to talk to. So it's COC or elected leaders, frontline staff, and people with lived experience and expertise of homelessness. And we let them decide how to structure those sessions based on their own local environment. And generally we try to keep them, less than 30 people each, because if not, then folks can't really participate in a meaningful way. So those are just that's the structure of what we've been doing. It's been working really well so far. And we've had, again, a ton of really just open, honest, sometimes painful, sometimes really joyful conversation with folks at all levels of our system.
Well, thank you, Anne. I wish we could do this all day with you, but I know you have a heart out, so I want to thank you for your time and for being with us today. Everyone, please give your virtual applause and share your appreciation in the Whova chat. Thank you again, Anne. Thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Take care, everybody, and enjoy your time together.